But as of today, as we know, it is officially, gang, what is it?
Week 12.
That's right. That's right. So there's 5 weeks left
Happy week
in
12.
that fantasy season.
Don't
So
get too excited for
what do we
week
need to
12.
do? Break out those magnifying glasses and identify a player at each position when it comes to best and worst matchups through week 16. So I need a quarterback that could cruise for the remainder, Fabs. Who is it?
Yeah, I almost hate to say this, but it's Jameis Winston after his 4-interception performance last week. But he does have the 3rd easiest remaining schedule among quarterbacks. Now, this week he's got Atlanta. Maybe that isn't as easy as we thought, but he's got Jacksonville, the Colts, the Lions, and then the Texans. So some pretty tasty matchups there for Mr. Winston.
Yo, I need a running back with a favorable schedule.
Well, I think this one's a layup. Josh Jacobs for the Oakland Raiders, and we know that he has been dynamic this year. I think he's going to probably be, the rookie of the year when you look at the way he's been playing. But the schedule is super favorable. Here's a rookie that's averaging almost 17 fantasy points per game this year, and you look at the matchup. Yes, I know this week they've got the Jets. They're number 1 against the run. He's going to have to earn it. But after that, the Kansas City Chiefs, they're 30th ranked in defense, and you go down the list. Tennessee Titans, the Jacksonville Jaguars, they're 29th against the run. The Chargers, 21st. You get the point. He's like a young car, a new car. They're going to rev him hard.
Okay, Rank, how about a wide receiver who looks at the remainder of their schedule and says, not too bad.
I'm really looking at the Colts schedule, which bodes very well for T.Y. Hilton. Now, obviously, he has not played since week 8, and even his designation for Thursday is still up for grabs. But you start looking at this schedule, and in particular, I'm looking at the playoff schedule. He's got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in week 14. Obviously, week 15 is going to be a tough matchup against the Saints, but it's still T.Y. Hilton. You'd feel compelled to start him. In week 16, Carolina Panthers. Put my name on that championship belt.
Whoa.
I'm taking it home.
I think you just put the cart before the horse. All right, we have a quarterback, a running back, a wide receiver. So, Marcus, you know what to do. A tight end with an easy schedule.
Oh, yeah, let's go Kyle Rudolph because it is the holiday season.
It is. 'Tis the season.
Rudolph is back in our lives again. Also, he's back in our lives because Mike Zimmer has decided that, hey, maybe we don't have to establish the run each and every week. We're throwing the football around. Kyle Rudolph is seeing a lot of targets, and he's got a schedule where a lot of those teams are in the top 6 when it comes to most fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. So I expect that Rudolph, with his nose so bright, will guide your fantasy slate.
Isn't this around the time
What if he
during the
didn't want to
holiday
guide the
season?
slate?
That's why
He just
he made
wanted to
that
hang
joke.
back.
Man, look, Santa didn't give him a choice.
Yeah,
I'm
just
saying
gonna
during the holiday
hang back at the
season,
North Pole,
usually-
Santa. Okay, Fabs, we talked about guys with easy schedules. How about you give us a quarterback whose schedule looks like?
Yeah, Josh Allen could leave Cole in your Christmas stockings, right? Not Cole, right?
Oh, that would be-
Cole, okay? If you look at the schedule, I mean, this is the toughest one any quarterback has for the rest of the season. He's got the Broncos, he's got the Cowboys, he's got the Ravens, the Steelers, and then the Patriots in Fantasy Championship Week. I talked about trading him, selling high after last week's huge game against Miami, and I meant it.
Rough schedule when it comes to a running back. If only Akbar had the answer.
Well, the worst remaining schedule for a running back has to go to this man,
How
Ezekiel
dare
Elliott.
have the
you do
answer.
that to
Okay,
me?
okay.
Yeah, well, just think about it. I mean, look, he's obviously a strong running back one, but when you think about where he was drafted, a lot of people are drafting him as the top guy. Well, he's not even, he's a guy that is not even in the top 5. He's just outside of the top 5, and that's not what you draft. When you draft a guy like Ezekiel Elliott, you want to get him, at least let him be the top 3. You look at the matchup, every single one of his matchups all the way into the Super Bowl, he's playing up against a top 10 defense. It's going to be tough for Ezekiel Elliott.
Frank, maybe we should say wide receiver with a tough schedule, just like we say his name. Cortland Sutton.
Cortland Sutton there. Yeah. You know what? He's been fantastic for you over the last couple of weeks, ever since they shipped off Emmanuel Sanders to San Francisco. Cortland Sutton has stepped up for this team, and I'm not saying that you drop him or anything like that, but there are going to be some tough matchups for him starting this week against the Buffalo Bills. But he does get a little reprieve in Week 14 against the Houston Texans, and then some other matchups you might or might not be playing. So, of course, Sutton has probably been helping you out during Buy-Mageddon and all that stuff, but just play it cautious with him moving forward.
Okay, Marcus Grant, tight end, bad schedule. The rest of 2019, go.
Mark Andrews, schedule not great. In fact, it might be the worst schedule for tight ends for the rest of the season there. All those teams he plays, 4 of those 5 teams, they're in the bottom half of the league when it comes to fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. But here's the thing. What are you going to do? Drop him?
Yep.
No. Trade him? No. Have you seen the tight ends out there? You're going to stick with Mark Andrews. You're just going to ride this thing out, man.
Yeah. Well, as the sizzle reel suggests, that Falcons defense, it's been good as of late. So let's step into that fantasy film room because Marcus, he's taking a closer look at that Falcons D, and he's here to share why they look so different right about now, and what it actually means for us as we move forward as fantasy managers. So, Marcus, what's been the biggest change so far?
Well, let's take a look at it because we got some stats here to kind of compare the start of the season to what they've been doing lately. And you see the first 6 games, the points allowed, obviously hugely different, the yards allowed. But that number there in the middle, the sacks, really the biggest thing there. 7 sacks in their first 8 games, and 11 sacks rather in their last 2 games. A huge change from what the Falcons have been doing the last couple of years.
Absolutely. Now, the biggest change really came week 10, and as much as I hate to say it, it came against quite possibly one of the best quarterbacks in the history of the National Football League.
Yeah,
right?
against Drew Brees and
Week
the
10,
Saints in Week 10. So we'll take a look at it because the big change really has come up front. You see Adrian Claiborne here at the defensive end spot. He's really picked up his game lately, but you see a lot of it, a lot of stunts, a lot of twists. You see Grady Jarrett come around. Claiborne gets up the middle. He's the one who gets the pressure and eventually gets the sack on Drew Brees. You saw that, the 11 sacks in the last 2 games, and that pressure up front has really changed things. So now if we look ahead to Week 11 against the Carolina Panthers here, they don't necessarily get the sack on Kyle Allen, although they got him quite a few times last Sunday. But here they get the pressure. They kind of dismantle him, kind of rattle him a little bit. And he ends up throwing a bad pass. It ends up with the interception. That's also been a big part of what the Falcons have done. That pressure, not just getting sacks, but also causing turnovers. And for fantasy, look, the thing you want out of a defense, you want sacks, you want turnovers, and they've been doing it the last 2 weeks.
Okay, so if I have Winston or Evans or Godwin, of course, we know Tampa Bay Buccaneers taking on the Atlanta Falcons defensive unit. What do you do if you have those guys?
Well, you're kind of on alert this week, which is sort of a weird thing. We haven't said that all year when we're talking about the Falcons, but no quarterback has been sacked more than Jameis Winston. No quarterback has thrown more interceptions than Jameis Winston. So that's a reason to be very wary of starting him this week. The other thing with this is Desmond Trufant is now back for the Atlanta Falcons, and he could lock up with Mike Evans. That pressure, that means Winston's not going to have as much time for those longer developing routes. It could be a frustrating day for Mike Evans as well.
And old Jameis Winston, 4 pick sixes on the season, and that's not great.
The points!
Yes. My dear guests, welcome to Fantasy Island. I am Mr. Akbar, and this is my trusted sidekick, Babu. Here, everyone's football fantasies come true. And the fantasy points always arrive on time.
The points!
Yes, Babu, settle down. Let's show our guests how it works. What's your fantasy?
Boss, I really want Todd Gurley to average 25 carries per game, every game for the rest of the season, because I need to trust him. The fantasy playoffs are coming, and Gurley is my RB1. Can you grant this fantasy, boss?
Yes, well, for you, Fabu, when you're on Fantasy Island and you're paying for the privilege of being here, anything can happen. Your wish is granted.
Thank you, boss. Thank you.
Shall I tell you my fantasy?
Yes, boss.
Yes. My fantasy is that quarterback Tom Brady will throw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in every single game leading up to the Super Bowl. I can see it now, throwing touchdowns from Giselle to Sony Michel. Yeah, just raining down points. That will happen here on Fantasy Island.
Hey, boss! The plane!
Who might this be?
Oh, boss!
Just like that.
It's NFL Fantasy Live's Cole Rice!
I can see we have a guest, and thank you for visiting Fantasy Island.
Thank you.
Fabu, take this young
Yes,
man's
boss, yes,
bag. Yes. Come on in here
How are
with
you,
your
my
cheap
friend?
suit.
Wow, whoa.
How are you
Personal
doing?
assaults, huh?
How are you
Doing
doing?
well. Excellent.
Good. What is your fantasy?
I'll tell you, Mr. Akbar. My fantasy for the remainder of 2019 is for the reigning MVP. Of course, that would be none other than Patrick Mahomes, to notch 40 points in every single game for the remainder of the season. Of course,
40 points.
After the bye week, the Oakland Raiders, the New England Patriots, the Denver Broncos, the Chicago Bears, and wrapping things up with the Los Angeles Chargers. 40 points. Will my fantasy be granted?
Well, this is Fantasy Island, and anything can happen on Fantasy Island.
Of course.
But your fantasy will be denied. Fabu, please return this man with his bags.
I hate
Yes,
your
sir.
guts.
Go on.
I hate your guts.
I love you too. Now it's time for our friend to return back to reality. Don't you say?
Yes, boss.
All right, let's say goodbye. Goodbye. Yes. And thank you for visiting Fantasy Island, where all your fantasy football dreams come true.
And still to come, if we're allowed to stay on the air, we're going to look back at some of the greatest running back fantasy seasons of all time. Which back put together the best fantasy performance ever? Find out as NFL Fantasy Live, presented by New Era, continues. At least we hope it continues.
Hey, boss.
Yes.
Who will come to Fantasy Island next week?
You never know. Perhaps Adam Rank.
Or Marcus Grant?
Yes, Marcus Grant. But you know, I had another wish to be the richest man in fantasy.
Oh, can I borrow some, boss?
Negative.